Remember the Fallen is an archive of stories from your ancestors. Today we listen to those that served in the deadliest, most costly conflict in human history, the Second World War. Their memories will never fade. My grandfather served in the Hellcat during the Second World War. An 8.8 centimeter high explosive shell entered the turret. He was the driver. He survived due to the singular fact that the driver was seated away from the turret. In his journal, which we found after he passed, he said he wished he went too, because they were his family of 2 years. My grandfather was in an American M4A1 Sherman. He was spotted by a column of German tanks. My grandfather's unit was retreating due to the heavy losses, but he refused to retreat and stayed behind and covered the rear, and was fired upon mercilessly until his tank finally exploded and killed him and his entire crew. My grandfather served in the 2nd Armored Division as a Sherman gunner and later an Easy 8 gunner. He joined the war in North Africa and fought his way into Germany. His tank was knocked out by a Stug, but only the turret crew survived, as the driver and co-driver both took a direct hit from the round. It's miraculous they survived. Don't hate me, my grandfather was a German Panzer Grenadier, and he only talked about the war when he was drunk, so one night he was drunk and we asked him about the war. He told me that he was on the retreat with the Army Group Center, or what was left of it. His hastily thrown together unit was very mixed. He was one of the only men actually originally given extensive infantry training. The rest of the men with him were regular infantry or dismounted tank crewmen. He remembers a Soviet attack that failed, and this was followed by a German counterattack. He advanced near a destroyed Soviet tank. He never specified which type, let's just say a T-34, and he was approaching. And as he was approaching, he saw one of the crewmen on the ground. He described the crewman like this. He was blonde and had brown noticeable freckles. He was no older than me, 16 maybe, he could have been 14, but I didn't know. He looked at me and said, "Zakam." He didn't move, just looked at me. And as the war raged around us, I pointed my machine pistol at him and let a round go. That was the worst part of the war for me. War is the same boy in a different uniform, fighting his brother. I hated the war. I hated my time in Russia. My grandfather served in a B-17 heavy bomber. His bomber was shot down, killing everyone on board except him. He said he wanted to go with him. He felt sad and guilty, but he came back and recovered. He was in the 401st Bombardment Group, bottom part of the formation, leader of the bottom formation. He was the pilot of the plane. He recently died due to health issues, and I forgot to mention some stuff. We got all the records from the crash when we were looking through the house. The mission he went on had heavy casualties, and his plane was the 10th to go down out of 30. He was not the only one to survive. The tail gunner left his position during the combat, and he balled up in the middle of the bomb bay area, and he was able to make it. ME-109 saw that the tail guns dropped and opened fire, killing everyone except my grandfather and the tail gunner. I learned that he only survived because of the thick armor plating on the back of his chair that deflected the bullet into the co-pilot. He was kept in a concentration camp where they kept him there for the rest of the war. I also found out that he took a round to the chest from an ME-109, and he died with it in him. He was treated at a German camp where they treated him well. All the Germans weren't bad. Well, actually most of them were good. They were just on the wrong side. At the end of the war, an officer in the camp gave my grandfather his Luger so my grandfather could pardon him. He did. My grandfather returned on a Liberty ship, and a tragic tale he told me. Some of the men there ate themselves to death. He returned home to his wife, and 2 years later, he had 5 children. One of them being my dad. He lived with a horrible breathing problem due to the bullet in his chest and the damage done by the landing from his parachute. That's my grandfather's tale. Since everyone is talking about their grandparents, my grandfather flew Corsairs and other bombers during World War II. He never talked about the war, nor did I ask, because I didn't want him to have to remember the war, and I thought it would be disrespectful to ask about the war. He was a commander, but I don't really know much about all his medals and stuff. But he gave me a model bomber. He also served in several other wars, and I forgot which ones, but after he retired, he became a teacher. And when he retired completely, he lived until he was 96 or 97, and he passed away in his sleep. Rest in peace to all that served in the war and all that fell. My great-grandfather died in Stalingrad. He was a platoon leader in the Wehrmacht. and when his platoon was surrounded, he told his men to drop their guns and surrender because he didn't want them to get killed. He was immediately shot by an SS officer for cowardice, but his men took revenge, killed the officer, and surrendered. Most of them survived as POWs and came back to Germany. One of his staff officers told my grandmother this 20 years after the war when he returned home. The official story until then was that he was killed in action, along with his platoon, because the Wehrmacht didn't want people to find out that a platoon leader surrendered. My grandfather served as a soldier in North Africa. He was very proud to be serving under Rommel. He said that he operated an 88mm cannon on the wide open terrains of North Africa, where you could see kilometers into the distance. And thanks to the precision of the 88, it was pretty effective against British tanks. He compared it to killing flies. I'm Japanese, and mine died during the Battle of Okinawa. He was a midshipman on the Yamamoto, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm proud of who he was and what he did. My grandmother still tells me stories about him, and I absolutely love listening to them, because it tells me a lot about my family's past. My grandfather was a part of the 101st Airborne. He told us that he wished he got torn down by the MG-42 that killed 3/4 of his platoon. My great-gramps was a paratrooper on D-Day. He met the real Band of Brothers, aka the most famous D-Day platoon. He lived through the war, but not the PTSD. He drank himself to death after the war. Rest in peace to all soldiers who fought in World War II. All sides, I don't care. My grandfather served in the Panzerwaffe. He was a commander of a Tiger tank in the Eastern Front. The tank had mechanical issues, and they had to abandon the tank. As they tried to retreat, they got captured by the Red Army and were executed. My great-grandfather was an American POW in the Pacific Theater. I don't exactly know what he did, but I think my grandmother told me he was a chef. When he was captured, he had seen some horrible stuff going on to others, like himself. My grandmother would tell me that he would cry in his sleep due to the experience there. I don't know the exact story about this, but since he was a chef, the Japanese made him cook meals and stuff, which was a poor decision because he salt poisoned them, which gave them a window to escape. So he and the other prisoners ran into a pitch black night with streaking bullets zipping behind them, and my grandmother told me he never looked back. He just kept running. The prisoners and himself escaped somehow. My grandmother didn't talk much about it, since it was a nightmare for him, and he only talked about it once with my grandma. He passed away after I was born, so I never really got to meet him. I still wish I could talk to him about it and know exactly what happened and how he actually escaped. Either way, if the story is true or not, he still has seen and been through tough shit. I like hearing stories about the war from all sides because it gives you a perspective of what it must have been through at that point in time. My grandpa served in a B-17 inside the ball turret in the whole time as the Americans entered World War II, seeing it from D-Day to the fall of Germany. He never got shot down. He prayed and cried, only wanting to see his wife and kids again. He never forgave himself for bombing innocent Germans. He had serious PTSD. And if you are not careful, his reflex would knock your teeth if you approached him wrong. Today he is dead from natural causes. It is a shame. I was too young to understand the man. He died before I had questions. My grandfather was captured while out on patrol in the Ardennes by a German squad setting up an ambush. I don't know what division he was a part of, but I do know it was not the 106th Golden Lion Division. My dad's grandfather was a firefighter in the Second World War. Him and his crew were taken out of fire when an Allied bomber dropped a bomb on them and killed all of them. My great-grandmother was one of the 30 night witches of the 588th Night Bombing Division, and I'm proud for her and other veterans. May they rest in peace. On the Spanish side of my family, my great-grandfather was sent to fight for Germany on the Eastern Front and was never heard from again. But on my Irish side, my great-granduncle was a tail gunner for an American bomber and survived the war. Here's a story about my great-grandpa. Some of you might know of this one attack on Dresden at the end of World War II. For those of you without a clue, here's some information to make a picture of it. People jumped into the water and the parks because everything was burning, but in the water, they were cooked alive. My great-grandpa was at the train station when they were told to hide in one of the two basements. He ended up in the smaller one. As time passed, he noticed that air was running out, so he went to the toilet. Meanwhile, in the bigger room, the people suffocated. None survived. Slowly, the same fate fell upon the people in the smaller room. Now the air in the toilet room started to run out as well. Then a bomb fell down next to the toilet, and my great-grandpa was partly covered in dust, stone, and some other things. He's sure to die, kept saying, "Anna, I'm sorry." But he had luck. Soldiers found him and pulled him out of the ashes. My great-grandpa stood up, then looked down and said, "You need to go back there. I lost my shoe. Please, I need my shoe." The soldiers just stared at him. A man, only a few scratches, standing between thousands of corpses, complains that he lost his shoe? I'm not quite sure how the story ends, but I know that when he went home, the first thing he said was, "Anna, I'm sorry. I've lost my shoe." My great-grandfather was a Soviet artillery commander in World War II. He served his time there and survived and went home to see his family and his 2 sons. My great-grandfather served in the Dutch Navy as a spotter on a smaller torpedo ship, but while they were in heavy combat, Japanese started entering the ships and took many people prisoners, and did so with my great-grandfather. My grandmother, then 6 years old, and great-grandmother followed him around as he kept getting placed into different Japanese camps until the war ended, and he almost got his freedom. He just had to go home, which was the plan to do with the Japanese cargo ship that still sailed under the flag of the Japanese Navy. But after getting 4 kilometers outside the port, they were bombed by American TDF Avengers, thinking it was a Japanese ship. That's where my grandfather died. He got the worst out of the war. Alright, and that will be it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening, and huge thanks for those who shared their family stories with us. If you would like us to cover your ancestor's story from World War II, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, and next time we'll try to include yours in the video as well. Now, if you enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe for new uploads. We'll be uploading weekly and probably going into many more stories in the near future. So, until then, I'll see you next time.